Welcome to Horticulture, where a group of extension professionals and plant people talk about the business, production, and joy of planting seeds and helping them grow. Join us as we explore the culture of horticulture. We're back. Still sounding froggy. Feeling froggy? I don't know. Are you guys feeling froggy? Or
That
was
always
just
kind of a
me
little
sounding
ambiguous to me.
froggy?
Froggy. What is froggy? I mean,
It is
I know,
whatever
like-
you want it
froggy.
to be.
Like you want to jump. Like,
that's right. You feeling
come
froggy?
get some.
Jump, jump, jump.
Who
Yeah,
wants
you're not,
it?
you're not just
Crisscross.
you're not
That's a different
content
thing.
on your little lily pad.
That's right. Feeling froggy.
We are moving. We're jumping into
Yeah.
fall gardening today.
Hungry for
That's what we're
flies.
doing. We're feeling froggy about fall.
Oh,
Yeah,
going.
I just brought that. I know. I was like about to start like a
I'm
rap,
listening.
but
And out of gas.
I'm listening. I mean, do we get out of gas? Is it that time of year
started
where
strong, burn
home
bright.
gardeners, burn bright like a diamond? Yeah.
Josh told me one time I'm like a star. Like when I go out, I'm gonna just be a black hole. I'm gonna suck everybody in.
It'll be like this brilliant burst of light, and then everything
Bottle
around
rocket.
it will get pulled in.
I remember that when I'm feeling really bad. I'm just like, you know what? Don't be the star Josh thinks you are.
Yeah.
Not even light shall escape me.
Nice.
I
Anywho,
bet it's quiet there.
Yeah.
The center of the black hole.
that's true.
Yeah.
Well,
Nothing
we're going to talk
escapes.
about it is hot and it is July, but that does not mean that it's not time to start thinking about cooler weather. And with cooler weather, we start thinking about our fall garden. Yes,
Do we?
Yeah.
it is time to be thinking. Actually, it's beyond time to be thinking. It's time to be doing for the fall
Oh.
garden by mid July. So
Yeah. So like July is kind of like the April of the fall garden, the
Yeah.
March, April, that
Yeah.
you're in that mode of like, you should have made plant. If you were going to start stuff from seed, you probably should have done that 4 to 6 weeks ago. Like
Yes.
if you wanted to have broccoli transplants of your own that you were growing. Now, the good news is you can get those other places.
Yeah.
This was something when I started, back when I worked at the horticulture research farm, and when I had started growing stuff before that, just realizing like how for a commercial
Proactive.
operation, yeah, I mean it's like as soon as you start into picking tomatoes, you need to be thinking about planting your fall garden. Like that's the reality of that.
I had a commercial producer call me, and he's hanging baskets, and he's got a big mum pad, lots of mums, but he grows some vegetables. And so he called me up. He said, so when do we need to be thinking about broccoli? And I was like, well, about 2 days ago. And because he was unaccustomed, it's exactly what you're saying, Brett. It catches even growers. I mean, he was not primarily a vegetable grower, even though he does that. He doesn't typically produce his fall transplants. And it really kind of shocked him a little bit. He said, oh, because broccoli is like 5 to 7 weeks, depending on how you start it and get it going. And he's like, oh, gosh, I got to get going on that. And it even caught a commercial grower by surprise that he needed to be doing that because it's something he didn't think about normally.
yeah.
Just to give a quick little rundown, we've shouted out ID 128 many times before. We will continue to do so. This is a publication on home gardening
It's a good
from
one.
the University of Kentucky, and within it, I'm just going to give you the rundown here of the things that say that the date of planting is July through some point in August. Okay. Beets, Bib lettuce, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, cabbage, carrots, cauliflower, Chinese cabbage, collards, endive, green beans. We're going to maybe talk about that later and how we might have to do some jiggery pokery there. Kale, kohlrabi, leaf lettuce, parsnips. You're too late. I'm sorry. Parsnips lovers of the world should have had those in June. Radishes you can plant as late as September. So I'm just, I'm not going to continue down this list, but there are a bunch of them. You can go in and check out table 13 in ID 128 and get a sense. And some of those are recommended to be planted as transplants. So luckily, a lot of the fall and spring stuff is direct seeded, which is good. But yeah, between July and August is when you might be planning out your or executing your successional planting of, like, if you want to have some fall salads, planting every 2 weeks, planting out some Bib lettuce. If you want to have some carrots that you're going to put away and you're going to eat now and maybe put some away, you're going to maybe be planting carrots every 2 weeks, July through the end of August. And with all of those things, are we, in the spring in Kentucky, we talk about like Derby Day or Mother's Day, if you're part of the rest of the normal world, as this point in our part of the country of like the first day where we're like, there's pretty much not going to be a frost this day, right? The first frost-free date. Are we thinking about that on the back end? Like there's a first frost of the year or scary time?
Fall gardening is even more so about the math because we're not as attuned to the planting schedules, and we're trying to, reverse engineer everything from that October 15th or October 20th date, our first typical frost. So we're trying to reverse engineer everything back from that. It's one thing, you've already mentioned that some things are direct seeded, some things are transplant. It's even more difficult if you're going to grow your own transplants, because then you have to add 5 to 7 weeks to the time that you want it in the ground. So yeah, that fall gardening is all about math and doing a little bit of garden math and just reversing back from that date in October that there's a good chance that it's going to frost. Yeah, it's a great point.
And not everything, we don't have to be afraid of a frost, right? For all the fall crops, we need to be more afraid of a freeze and a hard freeze of that can kill certain things. And even then, some things will persist beyond that.
I don't know the hard freeze. I will bring up the time Alexis dressed up as Mr. Freeze for staff meeting, and I was traumatized by that just a little bit.
You were traumatized? That looked great.
You will not put me in the pool.
I was not ready for that, though. It's still a form of trauma, even though it's good.
I don't think you know what trauma means.
Yeah, that sounds like amazing. Maybe it's played on all like pre-existing fears.
I used like blue. I like chiseled these cheekbones with blue, and I had like I was Frosty, man.
Did you take it from? Oh, were you Jack Frost or were you Mr. Freeze?
No,
Mr.
I was
Freeze.
Like from Batman.
No, I was from the Christmas movie. A Year Without
Christmas.
Yes.
I think it was A Year Without a Santa
Claus
Claus.
is coming to town, or maybe
the old one of the old claymation ones where you had like the guy
Charlie Brown Christmas,
Summer, and you had
Nightmare Before Thanksgiving.
Wait, you're naming just combining movie titles and things.
Yeah, 300.
I knew we had a Gerard Butler.
Yes,
Die Hard 2. Die Hard 2.
It's kind of a mishmash of themes that were in Alexis's character.
And hard freeze can bring fear to your heart and a surprise. I will attest to that.
My coworker was Summer because she's redheaded, and so she was all red, and I was
typecast
white and blue, and we sang the song. Now I'm gonna have to find it, and I'll post it in our stories.
You thought I'd forgotten that, didn't you?
I sang in front of all of my coworkers.
What did you sing? Give us a little snippet.
I sang the song.
Give us the iTunes preview.
I will find it and play it. You all continue to talk about fall garden,
We'll
and I
need
will
to post on YouTube so I can link to it in the show notes.
I'll report back.
Okay,
nice.
So garden math, yeah,
and I think Ray, we were talking earlier. In addition to the math, there's also a component that you need to think about too, which is that there are varieties that work better. There are within like green beans, for instance, or within carrots. Those are two good examples. There are some varieties that work really well for a spring and summer garden, and there's other ones that we might want to think about for fall.
Yeah, there really is, because the growing conditions are flipped. Instead of going from cooler, shorter days, we're doing just the opposite. And there's been a lot of work done on variety selection for those conditions. And I think it's Tennessee Extension. Our partners down south have done a lot of work on that. I'll have to look that up. But they have some great charts. I'm fairly certain it's Extension Service in Tennessee. And they have put some nice charts out that talk about things that work much better when they're summer planted, things that will germinate in those harsh conditions. Not only germinate, but they'll do well with the heat, because heat's a big issue. We talk about, and I'll back up just a little bit here. As I'm working, particularly like with homeowners, it's a tough sell for me when I get to the point to say, oh, are you going to do a a fall garden. They're like, what are you
Right.
talking about?
Right. I'm
It's
just making it through summer.
yes,
Give me a
it's
break.
100 degrees. I have kids in softball or soccer or whatever.
Mhm.
We're running 10 different directions. We're getting ready for school. So, this podcast is horticulture, and it's sort of a cultural thing and a timing thing and a family kind of scheduling thing. But it seems like everybody's excited, and, with kind of winter ending and spring coming on, that's an easy sell. I can sell that when the days get warm. Everyone is ready. I think that they lace some kind of, illicit drug in gardening magazines because everybody's eyes dilate and they're ready to go. We're ready to plant and get things in the ground. That is just
Like drugs,
the opposite,
apparently.
folks. Yeah, apparently something. It is something. Maybe it's garlic. I don't know what it is. But it is something.
Eyes wide, full heart.
Yes,
Please.
Just wide open, going
Can't
into
lose.
spring, ready to garden. It is not that way for summer.
Not
when
my
I,
experience.
When I tell people that,
Yeah.
Well,
not that way.
I'm sorry. I was Googling. It was Snow Miser, by the way. Heat Miser and Snow Miser.
Okay.
I'm Mr. Snow Miser. I'm Mr. Winter Fun.
I
Anyway.
think I feel like I need the tune maybe.
Oh, I mean, we're gonna play the tune. We're gonna
Okay,
play us
cool.
out with the tune, I think. But
I like that.
yeah.
Gives me
Listen,
something
all
to
right.
look forward to.
Yeah, I'll have to.
Like the fall garden. It gives me
There's
something to look forward
there's
to.
like 2 pictures in existence of me in that costume, but
Maybe 3.
So-
It's the one I took you didn't know about.
I've
Sorry.
never seen that one, ladies and gentlemen.
No,
so
you're
this
not.
will be fun. Going back to talking about timing is everything with crops. I think one thing we have to mention, and if you mention this, I'm sorry, but talking about when we've mentioned this before, that is days to maturity on crops. It'll say on your seed package, right? Days to maturity. Usually when we're going from spring into summer, so when we're going from cool weather into warm weather, we can look on kind of that shorter end of that range.
Yeah.
So if it says 50 to 60 days, it'll probably be closer to around 50. When we're looking at going from warm to cool, where the maturity time is during a cooler part, also, not only is it cooler, but there's less daylight versus days getting longer, days are getting shorter, which also matters.
It takes longer for things to grow. That
It
you
takes
may be
longer for
accustomed
things
to
to
growing
grow.
like a snap bean. Yeah, that's much slower.
Right. So you have to go on those longer days. Those days of maturity are still something good that you should, look at and do the math with. But that's kind of the reason there's that spread there. And so we want to go with those longer days when we're looking at that. But because things mature slowly and because we're going into cooler nights instead of warmer nights, the sugar contents are better for a lot of our crops. So when people tell me they want to grow broccoli or cauliflower, I usually try and convince them to do it in the fall, mostly because there's a lot of summer crops that are, exciting to get started. Broccoli and cauliflower are typically not one of them, but if you hold off on those, make space for them in your fall garden, the starches convert to sugars as those nights cool down. And so you have a better tasting product. And you also have products like, Brett, you mentioned earlier, you've grown some carrots, and certain carrots do better and they store better when they have come from a cooler soil than a warmer soil.
Well, it will literally, and on the seed packet, it will literally say this is a good warm season carrot.
Yeah.
Or a fresh eating carrot or whatever you want to call it. And then other ones will say that will be described as a storage carrot. And that's what they're talking about, is that you're storing it. I mean, you could theoretically grow it in the summertime and then store it. But in general, you're trying to grow it and put it into the fridge and store it for as little time as possible, just for logistics and everything else within a commercial operation. But within your home, like we have done, and taken a whole drawer in our fridge and filled it up with really tasty carrots that we stored for a while.
Yeah.
And yeah, it definitely, I think it has something to do with like the nature of the, I don't know if it's a cuticle or something on the outside of the taproot, like it retains moisture a little bit better. They don't get wobbly and floppy as quickly. That's a technical term. I think that the
wobbly and floppy, look it up.
That was a 90s band.
Botany 101.
They retain that turgidity, baby. But yeah, that, and I think that there's also, I would echo what you're saying about the quality differences of certain crops in certain contexts. 100%. And the way that was explained to me, I don't know if this is right or not, is that the part of the reason for like some of that, the higher sugar content is it's a response. It's like a freeze prevention response.
Yeah, that's what gives them their resistance.
So the sugars go
plants, yeah.
into the cells, the parts of the plant from the
Antifreeze.
roots. They go into
Yeah,
the leaflets or
antifreeze.
the whatever florets,
Mhm.
and they increase the concentration of that. And as we know from our chemistry classes, a higher concentration, like something like salt water, freezes at a higher temperature.
Mhm.
Or sorry, it
Or
freezes
at
at a lower temperature.
Yeah,
It can go to a lower temperature before
it
freezing.
prevents the
And,
freezing of the
it's
water.
very
we
similar,
got 'em,
yeah.
basically.
Yeah.
The little kale plant's like, oh, I don't want to freeze, and I just come and rip those leaves off and say, thank you.
Thank you.
It's amazing
for
the
that.
quality difference. I mean,
It is.
some of these things. If I've, we've done taste tests, and you can look at the results from different taste tests from farmers markets or from wherever, whatever source, and it's just always better and more well received. Those products like broccoli, for instance, if they're under those conditions where it's cooler, and they were harvested under cooler conditions, it's a completely different product. It really is.
Summer collards are for like diehards. You
Yeah.
gotta be like a greens
They bitter.
fan, or cook them in like bacon fat
To
for like
death.
6 years.
Yeah.
And in that case, you probably should have just waited till fall, because it's been it's been 6 years at that point.
Yeah.
It's
A lot of salt,
radically
a lot of
different.
fat, baby. That's the way
Yeah.
to do it. Bring those
We just
calories home.
pretend that the
cardboard
green
and it'll
thing
be
is
just
good
fine.
for us.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So those are cool weather crops. So like it makes sense that you want them at their peak when they're gonna thrive the most, versus the opposite of they're just getting started and the soils are cool, which is good for cool weather crops. But then when they're reaching their peak, a lot of the time, at least in Kentucky, sometimes we're hitting like 90 degrees in June. According to my temperature blanket that I'm crocheting, we did hit over 90s in
Whoa.
in May, or the first 2 days of June we were 90
Yeah,
or
it was hot.
above.
Yeah.
When burst.
According to my temperature
According to
blanket.
your temperature blanket?
Yes.
I don't know
is
what
it
that
telling you the
is.
temperature, or you just you use a certain yarn based on what temperature it was? Or
Wouldn't you like to know?
I would. That's yep.
Yeah, it sounds like some secret knowledge.
Well,
It sounds like it's talking to her, maybe, which is
Right.
why I'm maybe would talk offline about my concern
Yeah.
for your.
I haven't had a blanket talk to me in like
Linus, her
35
name is
years.
It's not Alexis, it's Linus, folks.
Josh is like the guy who does all the weather reports for the college. Is like, let me just call you later.
What is your blanket telling you?
Can you
The
mask
weather
your magic
blanket report.
blanket?
Weather blanket report. You've heard of being a wet blanket.
Mhm.
Alexis is a weather blanket. I don't know
Yeah,
what that
blanket.
entails.
Yeah.
No idea. So cool.
Yeah, and when we haven't, I don't know if you said this while I was Googling, but it's not on this list. Let me make sure before I say it out loud. It's not on this list as part of the fall garden, but is something we plant in the fall, is garlic.
Mm.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
Only in the
garlic
fall,
is
typically,
in
yeah.
Kentucky. We plant in October
Yeah.
for a June-July harvest, depending on the type. It
Mhm.
is the following year. So garlic is something I love. Garlic is something cool because number one, most people use it in some form or fashion. Number two, it's pretty much easy to grow as long as you have a place where it's going to drain well. And three, it's like if you just sucked at your garden this year, you didn't get it in or nothing was good, whatever, you can always just plant garlic because it's October, it's fast and easy, and then you don't have to worry about it until June, and you're like, oh, I have garlic, and then it's
We'll
something
always
you're
have
actually going to
garlic.
use, and it stores. So it's just like if you do nothing else, or if you're trying to build confidence, I feel like garlic is a good way to go.
Mhm.
Yeah.
It's a way to salvage a tough season. Fall gardening is just, I have different problems with, putting out things in the fall. Like germination is something
Ooh.
unless it's too cool. And in the spring, you worry about the soil being kind of cool and wet. Well, usually it's hot and dry.
Dry.
So yeah,
Sucks.
getting. I've had to water to get seeds to germinate. How about you guys?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Dry soil. Yeah,
Hot.
seed
It's tough.
germination, they need moisture.
It
So
is terrible.
Yes, it
They
is.
don't need sunlight to germinate in most cases.
Right.
And so that is something like there are different techniques that different people propose. I haven't used them personally, so I don't really know, but maybe you all can comment on that, like the putting the cardboard over it for a certain amount of time to
It
help
does help
retain soil moisture. The problem is if you leave it on for too long, once those plants do need sunlight, they need it, because of the whole photosynthesis thing.
Well, and if you're planting beans in
That
a
whole thing.
commercial scenario, go a quarter inch deeper, something like a snap bean, and it does make a huge difference. You can tell where you went just a little bit deeper. I'm not talking about way deeper. Quarter inch is not very much, but you'll see that it'll germinate 3 to 5 days earlier in some cases because it gets down where it's cooler and has
Mhm.
more access to moisture, and it keeps that seed from drying out. You don't want the seed coat to dry out because that's a pretty harsh environment. It makes a huge difference, that quarter inch.
Another
It
That's
really
thing, a
does.
lot of these fall crops that we're talking about are really small seeds, other than like peas and beans,
yeah.
right?
Yeah.
These are
Ones you can see
small.
the seed.
Yeah, exactly. These are
You
going to
don't
be
actually
really
cover it.
small,
Yeah.
hard to pick up with your fingers, kind of thing. So one thing, and what that means is that they dry out even faster, right? And that means
Right.
that you have to sow them shallow, or else they'll never be able to make it up through the
They don't
soil
have
if you
enough
plant
energy
them
in
too
there.
deep. Right?
Yeah.
Exactly.
Mm.
So one thing that my dad always did growing up, and it was fun. I I don't know about like you guys, but things that like you learned as a kid, and then you find out like maybe the scientific reason why that
Mhm.
works. I always thought that was cool. But one thing my dad did growing a garden was he would put his seeds between, and granted this is small scale, he would put his seeds between wet paper towel on a plate for a day or 2 days, um, and so what he was doing, as now the person with degrees in this, is he's imbibing them with water. So that essentially signals that seed that they should start growing because
Mm.
they're full of water. And so he may wait until that radical comes out, which is that little first root that comes out to plant, but you don't necessarily have to. Once they're kind of swollen, you can see that they're, full of water. Planting out your carrot seeds, lettuce seeds, if you've had any trouble, and that will really speed up that process of them actually producing leaves that are then photosynthesizing. You still need to keep high moisture because they're itty bitty babies, but it really can speed up that process. It's not great on a big scale, but like I've done this with seeds too that I'm not super confident in. So either I've had the seed for a while and I don't want to plant out and seeds that aren't good and get weeds coming up on their places, or ones that I'm not confident in. Like as far as like I've not grown them before. So I did that this year with some Mimosa pudica, which is the little ferny looking plant it's called touch me not, and when you touch it the leaves all fold in.
Oh yeah,
And
yeah.
sensitive fern is another name for it. So I've never grown it before, had no idea really what I was doing, couldn't find any great resources for germinating them from seeds. So I did the little paper towel thing like my dad did, and I let the radical come out, and then I potted them up in little cell trays, and I was like, look at my dad teaching me things. I didn't learn that in college. My daddy taught me that one. So
Get it from my daddy.
I got it from
I
my
want to
daddy.
know how to
So
control weeds in the summer garden. Somebody tell me that. I have trouble with weeds too, along with germination.
Have you tried wrapping
flamethrower,
them in wet paper towels?
I've tried
flamethrower,
singing to them, and that usually kills them.
blowtorch,
Oh,
So
gotcha.
yeah,
blowtorch.
Well,
blowtorch.
so,
Actually, blowtorch does work. Yeah.
I was going to react to something you were saying earlier, Ray, that about the traditional home gardener, people thinking about gardens in general, like not at the surface level, but just at a more traditional garden is that summer garden. And that by the time the fall rolls around, they're kind of done. It's been really interesting to see with both the development of the high tunnel phenomenon
Mm-hmm.
in the spread of high tunnels, but also just beyond that, people who are thinking about market channels slightly differently or trying to meet a market need in a different way. Then we actually have some operations in Kentucky that focus almost exclusively on those shoulder seasons. They might grow stuff throughout the whole year, but they really are, they're not having a huge crop of tomatoes. They're not waiting to have a huge crop of tomatoes. And what that allows them to do, and as someone who used to work in high tunnels, I can tell you that from May 15th, well, that's not exactly, maybe June 1st through like
Mid-
August, September, late
Yeah.
September, it is not a place that you really want to be.
No, it's not
No.
pleasant.
Outside, you don't necessarily want to be
Right,
there
right.
for some of that, but
Yeah.
and I think that it's just a different way of thinking about it. And I personally, when I got away from that, wasn't growing things anymore and was working in extension, we grew some tomatoes and peppers and stuff like that, but we mostly grew carrots and beets and leafy greens on those shoulder
Mm-hmm.
seasons, in part because I'd hated spending that much time out in the summer garden And by the time July rolled around to plant the fall, I was like, okay, I can go through
Yeah.
this hellscape for a brief period of time.
Yeah.
And it was just a different way of thinking about it. And it's not necessarily, again, typical or whatever, but it has been an interesting component, because if you're interested in selling to like institutions or schools or whatever, many of them are not at peak demand or even in session at all during the summer months. And so
that's what I was.
If you want to meet that market demand, and or, I mean, in general, local food centers around the local produce and plant-based products center around that seasonal window of summer. But as we've seen, season extension and value-added products, so we had a little bit of a technical bump there, but true to extension form, I'm just going to keep on rolling with the thought that I was having, which is that I've seen people try, and experienced it to some degree myself. They try to kind of go all the way full throttle on the shoulder season, have a high tunnel, early shoulder season, early summer crops, grow early fall, put stuff in for fall, take the summer crops late, and they just go in gangbusters year round. And that can really quickly wear you down to a nub. And so those producers that I talked about, I think the ones who have gone to focusing on the shoulder seasons, focusing on the leafy greens for marketing reasons, also have done that just because there's a realization of like a traditional seasonal outdoor production system can't grow all the way through, at least intensively, all the way through the year. And there is this break period. The way that Alexis talks about it is that she sleeps with the trees, or when the trees sleep, she sleeps too. Sleep with the trees sounds like a hippie mob threat.
Right.
You're sleeping with the trees tonight.
You're sleeping with the trees, baby.
It's a very Kentucky thing.
I do feel like personally targeted though by your comments, Brett, because I am becoming better at the person who is gay. Because once again, I'm going to bring it back to cut flowers, because we talk about the fall garden. Gardens can also be flowers. And so if you're growing flowers, you should also be thinking, in fact, in my schedule for July is, all the different things I'm going to sorry.
Faux
for
she's going to sew them for real. She's not going to faux sew them. She's going to sew them for real.
She's going to sew them.
True sew.
So all the things I'm going to start for fall harvest. And then I have later in August will be the things that I'm going to put in that will overwinter as those cool flowers. It's flower month, so we have to make sure we hit on flowers. But for those of you who do that, and those shoulder seasons, and there's a lot of cut flower growers, even though we tend to think of a lot of these flower crops. Same with gardens. When you think about a garden, you don't think about rutabagas. You're thinking about tomatoes, right? It's kind of the same thing with flowers. But a lot of people have cut back because people are on vacation. There's not as much, people are growing their own stuff. And so there's not as much demand in the summer as there are in those shoulder seasons. But we're still farming year round, like garden. Mm-hmm. You're thinking about it. You're doing something for it year round.
And as far as
far
as technique and technology, that core season's always going to be there if you decide you want it. But in order to do the off-season stuff, particularly some of the things that we need additional technologies to overwinter, that's something you have to like really be strategic about going after. And so I think that's another part of it too, is like if these people who are focusing on the shoulder seasons, and yes, they're growing some stuff throughout the summer, if it suddenly was like people only want stuff in the summer, that pivot is not as difficult because nature isn't fighting you. Your latitude is not fighting you in that same way. I had a question, I guess. It would relate to flowers. It would also relate to other edible stuff as well. And this is not necessarily a fall garden question, but it is, okay, we're thinking about in July, we're thinking about, September, October, November. Do we also need to start thinking, or at least planning about planting things like perennials? If you want to have put in fruit trees, if you want to put in shrubs or brambles or blueberries, we may need to order plants. You may need to. When's the timeline that we typically think about doing that stuff?
For flowers, we say you should be ordering when the stuff is blooming. So if your tulips are blooming in April, you should be ordering your tulips for next April in this April is kind of like a good rule of thumb, or within, that's flexible, but that's like when you should be.
Good reminder.
It should be on your plate to do within the next.
And those bulbs are then going to go in the ground when?
So if it's tulips, those bulbs are going in anytime before the ground freezes, October through, depending on what we get. Maybe we should have a whole episode on tulips.
Sure.
But depending on a lot of things, you can plant all the way through December or even January if they're pre-cooled and your ground's not frozen yet, which is the case in Kentucky. The past couple of years, we've not seen as many. We've had really cold temps, but we've not had sustained low temps, which is what a lot of our plants need for good bloom or tall stems and those kinds of things. But back to perennials in Kentucky and in a lot of states where you're going to have hot summers, let's put it that way. Tennessee is going to be similar to us. Some of these border states you can kind of take with a grain of salt, but we say actually fall is a time to plant your perennials, especially your trees, anything that's like a woodier, larger thing. Fall is the best time to plant those because you are going with nature in that way. That plant is going dormant, and so essentially it's going dormant mostly above ground. The roots are still going to do their thing, and they're slow and they're sleepy, but they're still working. And so we want to do that when we want them to be establishing themselves when there's not a ton of pull from above ground plant parts and a lot of stress there. They're also going to go and start waking up in a time of year when we get more rain. So we get a lot of rain in the springtime and into the early summer. Traditionally, historically, so they're getting a lot more rain in their first kind of wake up in their new spot, and so that's why we say perennials. Now the colder areas, so like Arbor Day was created in, was it Idaho or Iowa? A northern state, a Dakota maybe, I don't know, somewhere where it gets cold and it stays cold for a long time, and so Arbor Day was like formed in one of those northern states. And so they recommend planting in the spring. That's why Arbor Day is in the spring, because that's when they plant their trees, because they have such a longer cold period where the warmer you are, usually we're trying to be in the fall.
Right. Nebraska City, Nebraska was the first American Arbor Day. 1872. The first actual Arbor Day was in a Spanish village in 1594. So
Spanish just get it.
It just rolled off the tongue.
Arbola.
I love it.
Did you guys know the Spanish name for tulip is Dua Lipa?
I wouldn't say that I knew that.
Oh, sorry, that's the wrong. I got the wrong tab open.
You're gonna get a
Dua Lipa greatest hits.
Yeah,
blog of puns.
I was trying to figure out how she does her makeup, and you know how
right.
You know how it is.
Kind of like a tulip, maybe. Who knows? Cross reference.
Tulip, Dua Lipa.
Dua Lipa.
Dua. It sounds like Italian.
Due. El Duce? No,
yeah. Anyway, so it sounds like some of the bulbs, the garlic, when we used to do annual, like grow strawberries as annuals, we would typically plant them in September.
Yes.
There are some things that you actually do plant in the fall. It's maybe not for a fall garden, for a fall harvest, but it is a activity in the garden during fall.
Fall is a very active time in the garden. If you look at it, I like that, Bray. You kind of zoomed out for a minute. Fall's super active as far as other things that you're doing besides just putting in these successional crops or these fall planted crops. It's whether it's a tree, shrub, or whatever, or garden cleanup. Fall's a super active time in the lawn and garden, commercially and at home. Yeah.
One of the bonsai practitioners who has a pretty heavy focus in horticulture that I listen to and learn from talks about how, in his mind and the way that he conceptualizes things, fall is actually the first season, the start season botanically, because if you think about a seed's food source that it uses to germinate is mostly created and stored in the fall, like the seed formation before, ahead of this, and then it drops. And in the same way, Alexis was talking about a lot of that root growth and some of that vascular tissue growth and the transition away. I mean, that is it. That's the plant storing things up, putting things away. It's like the prep, it's like packing before your vacation. You're packing before your vacation is the most important part. And you get there and you have all the stuff that you need, and it's a great, beautiful vacation/tree. Well, that starts with your planning period. So that's just an interesting way of kind of reframing the thought that like spring is the first, or May is the first part of the season. It's actually, and it's all continuous, right? It all feeds back on itself. But he talks about that, and he's a clever lad.
Because I feel like in farming, even if you're doing summer stuff, you're thinking about what seeds you're going to buy. You're thinking about crop plan. You're thinking about your rotation. And a lot of that is done in fall and like, into winter. And so like to think of that as like your start of the year, like you said, packing before the vacation, I think of it almost like a week. Like that's your Sunday, right? Where you're planning what you're doing for the rest of the week. And then spring is Monday and you're setting yourself up and kind of getting through, that. But I love that. Fully agree. At least in our area of the country, our latitude, that makes so much sense in my brain.
Yeah, and I think just coming out of winter, lots of showy flowers, new leaves, it's easy to fall in love with spring.
Yeah,
the importance of fall. We're talking about planning for a fall harvest with the garden, but like you said, Ray, very active time of year for us and for perennial plants, and also just like for seed saving, for instance, like you're going through that process, and seed saving is a huge part of the culture of horticulture, and has been historically over time. And I think that's another element of, you're preparing and thinking about the end of the season as a time when you may be ordering seeds, but you also may be saving them. And if you don't do that, there's the old saying about when you start to live beyond your means, that you're eating your seed corn. That same exact product. Like if we don't put aside enough stuff to grow this for next year, this late summer, fall period, we're not going to have this again. And that starts this, I think, longer term thinking about the relationship with the garden, the relationship with plants. That's like this huge part of our cultural experience of growing gardens and growing plants.
I just wonder how much of our rhythms, as particularly homeowners, how much of our rhythms when we think about fall gardening is determined by the commercial availability of transplants, which are not as available in the summer. I don't see a lot of where I'm at. I know I can go hunt them down, but I don't see as many plants, broccoli plants, for instance, sold at a time for fall planting as I do summer. And interestingly enough, I don't see a lot of trees for sale in the fall at local box stores. Not as many as I see in the springtime, where we typically say are suboptimal. That's not the optimal time. It's the second best time. But I wonder how much of our rhythms are determined by like retail management and availability. I think a lot about that and how things come about for gardeners. Now, commercially, you're absolutely right. 100%. Commercial people know that if they don't get the latest pumpkin seed and order that early fall, they're not getting it. If they wait until spring, they're not going to get those choice varieties that may be new and in high demand. But homeowners are at the mercy sometimes of just retail availability. I see that a lot.
Yeah, I think, you're talking about the retail environment, and this is taking a step outside of just the horticulture, but it you think about like the cycles of pushing like decorations and like vibe, that it's like, oh my gosh, it is June 27th and I'm already seeing Halloween decorations.
This many days until Halloween.
This way of kind of like shifting and creating this idea that there's fall and there's summer, and we are moving out of summer and into fall, as opposed to like embracing the transitional period. Like this, the trees don't go from green to yellow on October 1st.
They do on my Instagram account.
Exactly. Now, Ray, the pumpkin spice latte in Ray's, or the pumpkin spice in Ray's lattes does triple on October 1st.
It does. It ramps
Ray
up.
is real
Already at a
basic
disturbingly
about
high
his
level.
pumpkin spice.
It ramps up. Yeah.
Pumpkin spicy.
I get this orange
hue,
more of an orange hue to my face. It's because of all the pumpkin spice latte.
That's the cycle. But I think that idea of like commercial image and vibe creation has this way of shifting our the way we experience our world, and it's not even like, it's still hot out and you want me to buy fall leaf decorations or whatever, and it's, I don't know, and then not to rail on that or anything, I understand that they're doing their own thing in their own way, but it creates this strange, because even when people go to an agritourism operation and they're going out to pick these pumpkins, well, pumpkins are a fall thing, so they must have been planted like in September, October, right? And it's like, no, I mean, you're thinking, and you have to think that way for, if you're doing commercial, you kind of have to think that way, because like consumers are conditioned to feel that way. But that's part of the reason I think sometimes why it feels so strange to think about plan ahead toward these periods of time where it's going to be cooler out while it's still hot, is because as a consumer, we're just sort of served that when it's available.
Right.
And which is not maybe all that good of a thing for us overall in our
It's
connection
like the
to
great and powerful Oz, do not look behind the curtain.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's
for all you planners out there, though. This is for you. I said for all you people who just like really love to plan, maybe like a spreadsheet, really like a calendar.
Alexis is talking about her journaling, I'm sure.
I mean,
lots of dates in there.
I mean, personally, the depth of summer is a great time to fantasize about fall.
Yeah.
That's how I get through summers when it's really hot out. So yeah, it should, thinking about it should be a positive thing.
But do you fantasize about fall gardening?
Late fall gardening, I fantasize about, putting some bulbs in like towards the end. It's nice and cool out.
And just another quick reference is if you are thinking about doing cover cropping, there are if you wanted to get a cover crop in before you planted your garlic or something like that, you still have a window to get in something short like a buckwheat or something like that. And if you want to do a fall cover crop like over the winter, if you want to do a fall planted cover crop over the winter, usually a lot of those are going in that September through November window, depending on what it is. The rye tend to be able to be planted later. The wheats need a little bit earlier, but that's just another component to think about. If you wanted to get a little cover crop in on top of your garden, that later fall window is a time to be able to do that.
I want to go back to Ray mentioning like availability. So again, that can be hard. I've heard some people say like, I really want to do a fall garden, but I didn't get my seed started, or, whatever that is. And when you're listening to this, you may be feeling a little bit late. For most people, like, we're all happen to be around central Kentucky. So if you're in northern Kentucky or, further east Kentucky where you've got some mountains around you, which is going to affect your temperatures, you guys may be a week or two behind us, but central and southern, you can get away with, and like Brett said earlier, a lot of these plants can be direct seeded. So you're not late. So anytime kind of July to up to like August 1st, some of that other stuff, you can go all the way to mid-August that you can do if you can get a hold of the seeds, which you can still order online. That's the beauty of internet. But I know that like I was just at our southern states and they still had a lot of fall seeds in there, and so you can go in and get those for the ones that you want to do more as a transplant. So broccoli you can direct seed, but it can often be better as a transplant. You still have time if you can do some season extension. And so that time that you're going to take up creating that transplant that's going to go into the ground, you can make up that time if you can cover them somehow. So floating row cover, which is essentially just there's a couple names for it for kind of basically the same thing. That's sort of like a cheesecloth type consistency. You'll see it listed as Agribon, which is kind of just a brand name that a lot of people use. Remay cover I usually call it Remay. Some people call it tobacco cloth. I think technically, Ray, please chime in here. actual tobacco cloth maybe is a little bit different, or it's a heavier weight or something like that, but it's
It
the
was
same
very specific for that crop, yeah. But
yeah,
it's a version of that with its own
exactly. So
properties, yeah.
it's something that's sort of like more of like a cheesecloth, like is a good way to think about it, where it will let moisture and air through, but it is still like a woven cloth type thing. So you can use those, and you can use these little hoops that you can make yourself, or anything to keep that fabric up off the plants. But you're creating a little microclimate there. And so when we get to those periods where, if it's after October 15th, that these things are going to be ready and we maybe have a frost coming in, usually that time, at least in our area of the state, it's a frost. It's not a freeze. So we just need to protect it a little bit. And that, believe it or not, the 2 to 4 degrees that frost cloth, that Rime can give you, can be the difference between you having a crop and not having a crop.
That's
it
2 to
seems
3 weeks
crazy to
difference,
think about it, but
yeah.
And Josh, we've talked about this before, but and this is something you've created, and you've done it for high tunnels, and it was like temperatures for crops.
Yeah.
But the temperature range is the temperature. It is what it is. Just high tunnels will give you more time, but the temperature that crop can withstand is the same no matter where it's located.
This is the high tunnel planting date calendar.
Right, yes. Right, yeah, where we have the minimum temperature listed where there's plant damage, but then that's separate from the temperature where it actually grows, right?
Yeah.
Or the optimal range. So you can protect your plant from a frost or damage. And I mean, that's what I have noticed with kind of the high tunnel thing, is that it's not so much like you're having to constantly protect your plant from very cold temperatures. It's just like these little sudden short duration events. And if you can get them through that, then you have weeks of, good growing conditions. Just protecting them from that one.
Big part of it too is wind, because the wind affects the plants so much more. And so it can do damage both through direct cold damage, but it can also dry the plants out, because when it's cold out, the relative humidity usually is pretty low, and it can actually blow across the bottom of those leaves if it's completely unabated. And the row cover or the high tunnel, just that little bit of deflection again makes a huge difference. If you've ever been walking down a cold street getting blasted in the face by cold wind, and then you just step out, like behind a building or step behind a car or something, and it's like, oh, I feel suddenly so much better. Well, your plants feel that way too. And I will say, like, the season, you can get the row cover stuff in, like, we have some, bulbs and things that will come out early by sometimes because things are unpredictable or whatever, and we don't have a good way of protecting them. And we will go out with like tarps and throw them over those things if we feel like we're going to have a frost that's going to damage it. And this is in spring. But like, you don't have to necessarily go whole hog, especially if you like plant stuff kind of conservatively. And it just so happens that there's going to be a cold patch, and you're not just planning on that happening. That's another thing. We put them on at night, take them off so that the sun can warm them up and they can do their thing during the day. But
and there's a big difference in some of the covers we're talking about. Some of the ones like the floating covers, they're kind of naturally self-ventilated because of the nature of the covering, which is there's a big difference in a low tunnel, which is ones that you have to be very careful about the temperature buildup.
That's like a plastic covering.
Yes, there's a big difference in those, and you use them differently. Do any of you guys have any experience with like the slitted low covers or the ones that are self-ventilating? Has anyone used any of those? There's lots of options out there now, particularly for commercial growers. But yeah, those are two different things, and that's important to note. I think for homeowners, floating row covers is something you should key in on. It's more appropriate. It's more low key. It's easier to manage, I think, in a lot of cases, and it's a little bit more forgiving if you get the mid-weight covers that don't trap as much heat. It just all depends on what you want them to do, but I think they're easier for most homeowners to manage.
Yeah, if you are shopping for them, pay attention, because there's ones that are so thin that they're just to keep insects out. And there's some that are a little heavier that will give you a little bit of frost protection. And then there's ones that are like frost blankets where it's like
double covers.
Yeah. You're using it when it's negative degrees.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. You can use them as a blanket.
Yes.
Literally. I think that kind of mid-weight and all of you guys have used this before, but the one that like I seem to like, and the one that's always out of stock is the like the Ag 30. They do it, and the 30 just seems to be like a good midweight where it's going to give you that, 2 to 4 degrees of protection, wind protection. But like if this, and you can leave it on, it's going to ventilate enough. But if it does get warm, like if you're using it in addition to like a plastic covering or something, it will, hold on to a lot of heat. But in general, like you're not going to kill your plants if you leave it on a warm day or something. And it lets enough light through, especially in the winter time, that you're going to get, because that's the other thing. Like if you get a really heavy blanket, you may not like kill the plants from heat, but if you leave it on, you're not going to get any light, and the plants is a photosynthesize. So there's also kind of that aspect, which is why a lot of people like plastic if they can control, that ventilation. If they're venting that somehow, they like plastic because it's as much light can get through as possible as far as coverings go.
A lot of technology out there to extend the growing season. And I know commercial producers just love that. And we've seen we've mentioned it on the show before in the past. Kentucky is one of those states that we've just seen a lot of growth in this area. High tunnels, low tunnels, protected ag season extension techniques. We've just seen an explosion of this over the last several years.
Yeah. If you've got questions or want to hear an episode of just kind of the difference, like, there's a lot of different like ways to do season extension on a small, and a lot of things that are small scale can be large scale if you just make it larger, and then there's some things that are really more like that's a large scale thing or that's a small scale thing. So there's kind of everything in between. Maybe we should do an episode on just kind of the pros and cons of each one so that people who are trying to decide what scale they want to do or what's right for them, can have a little bit of that. Maybe we should do something like that. That sounds fun.
Oh yeah, season extension.
We got some great resources
for
that.
I'll tell you what. I think that might be a good place to wrap this one. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's what I was just gonna say.
Okay, great minds. So I think the couple of the take homes probably is that if you are wanting to have a fall harvested garden of the cole crops and root crops and stuff like that, now is the time to be putting those things in the ground. And now through August, so now being when this comes out on July 16th through August. And then if you're thinking further into the fall, some activities and planting things that you might be doing would be, yes, all of your fall cleanup of all that summer stuff, but also putting in things like bulbs. You may be looking ahead and checking recommendations for when you want to be planting things like trees and perennials and that kind of stuff. And if you want to be ordering, earlier is usually better as far as getting seeds, getting a hold of that stuff. A lot of the things that you can do for a fall garden can be direct seeded. Some of them do need to be transplants or will do better as transplants. And there's going to be challenges associated with a fall garden in the same way that there's challenges associated with a spring garden. But there is a lot of activity during this upcoming fall time. And one of my favorite times of year is when the fall stuff starts coming in and the summer stuff is still coming in. So you can have like a nice kale salad with some chopped peppers on top. I mean, come on. Can't beat that. Any other takeaways you all wanted to add as key points?
I think you got it.
Awesome. It's too late for parsnips.
Yeah, too late for parsnips. All you parsnips lovers.
And potatoes. Sorry, peeps.
The pea lovers, the people who love the pea crops. Whoa.
That should be the name of the episode. Too late for parsnips.
Too late for parsnips.
Doesn't tell you about that. It gets the people going.
We'll kick it over to you, Alexis, to take us out of here.
All right. Well, don't forget to follow us on Instagram, at Hort Culture Podcast. You can also send us an email. You can find our email in the show notes. If you've got questions, you want to hear a specific podcast, definitely let us know. It is July, so we're going to keep talking about cut flowers in the upcoming episodes for Kentucky Cut Flower Month. So follow along with that. The Kentucky Horticulture Council, Center for Crop Diversification on social medias. If you're into that,